The strange but true story featured on this podcast contains details some people may find distressing. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Chyaz Samuel, and things are about to get weird. Hello my friends, welcome to a brand new episode of Things Are About to Get Weird. If you're a long-time listener, then welcome back. It's lovely to be chatting to you again. And if this is your first time tuning into the show, I'm so excited that you've joined us today. This is a podcast dedicated to strange but true stories of all kinds, whether that's bizarre true crime cases or odd unexplained phenomena, or indeed tales that sit on the spookier side of the fence, which is where we segue into the topic of this episode. Today, I'm going to be telling you all about the strange goings-on that have taken place and actually continue to take place at the building described as America's most haunted house, the Whaley property, located in San Diego. This place has a fascinating and really quite dark history, and whether you're a believer or a skeptic, I think that its past alone is sure to send a shiver or two down your spine. A couple of quick warnings before we begin. There will be mentions of infant death and of a person taking their own life in this episode, as well as a few other gruesome details along the way. As always, I'll do my best not to dwell on these parts, but do bear that in mind before we get into the story. So, what makes the Whaley House so notorious? Let's explore this together. When I think about San Diego, my mind doesn't usually go straight to ghostly encounters and paranormal happenings. Instead, I think about the ocean and the sand, and the Mission Beach boardwalk where I finally met up with my very first internet friend, Xander, when I visited a few years back. It's a place I associate with sunshine and a relaxed vibe, but as it turns out, there are parts of this Californian city which have a reputation that is far more chilling than chilled out, and one such spot can be found at 2476 San Diego Avenue. Now, if you were to simply drive past the building located here, you'd probably be struck by the large white pillars and eye-catching balcony at the front of the house, as well as noticing the signs which now advertise it as a museum. But beneath its attractive exterior, the Whaley House is thought to be home to several permanent residents of the spirit kind, as well as a tragic and twisted history. So in order for us to get the full picture of not only the house but the land it stands on, let's head all the way back to 1856, the year construction on the home began at the instruction of the wealthy businessman Thomas Whaley. Thomas's story is interesting in itself. He was actually born and raised on the other side of the country in New York City, but had moved to the West Coast in around 1849, during what was known as the California Gold Rush. Most accounts seem to favour labelling Whaley as a pioneer and hugely successful, whilst brushing over the fact that many of those who prospered during this time did so by destroying the land, livelihoods, and often lives of Indigenous Native American communities. But this dark tale could easily be an entire episode in itself. My point today is that Thomas Whaley became a wealthy man in California. Though he wasn't a gold miner himself, he set up a store in San Francisco selling mining equipment and other general hardware. In May of 1851, though, the shop was actually destroyed by a fire that was believed to be arson, and at this point, Whaley decided to move a little further down south to San Diego. Here, he continued to build his businesses, and even managed to temporarily return to New York in order to marry a woman named Anna Delaunay, before they moved back to San Diego together. And it was at this time that Thomas decided to invest some of his wealth into building his dream dwelling in the city's Old Town. It's often been speculated that the Whaleys likely got a pretty good deal on the spot they chose to build their home on, because whilst it was a renowned plot of land within the city, its notoriety hadn't been gained for the best of reasons. The Whaley House stands in the place that was once home to the San Diego Gallows, where an innumerable number of convicted criminals would have died by execution. And if that wasn't spooky enough, it's also very nearby to the El Campo Santo cemetery, which still stands today. More on that later. Seemingly unfazed by the history of the land he was building on, Thomas was very vocal about the vision for what he was creating, proclaiming, quote, "My new house, when completed, will be the handsomest, most comfortable and convenient place in town, or within 150 miles of here." And the finished home really did live up to this bold claim. The two-story Greek Revival-style building was unique within the city and was built using bricks manufactured in Whaley's very own brickyard. It featured rosewood and mahogany furniture and fine carpeting, and I can only imagine that it would have been the talk of San Diego upon completion, which brings us to August of 1857. But whilst this should have been a joyful time for Thomas and Anna, their family was about to be hit by a terrible tragedy. By 1858, the couple had 3 children, Francis, Thomas and Anna, but less than a year after they moved into their new home, poor Thomas Jr., who was just 18 months old, sadly died from scarlet fever. This was, of course, absolutely devastating to the Whaleys, and haunted by the death of their infant in their own home, Thomas and Anna actually moved back to San Francisco to try and escape their grief. A quick side note here, some accounts state that shortly after Thomas's death, a store the family owned in San Diego also burnt down, but I think there may have been some crossed wires with this one. The official Whaley House website clearly states that the shop fire was the one I referenced earlier, the one that happened in 1851 in San Francisco, not in San Diego. So it does seem that there's some confusion about that. And as far as I can tell, it was the death of Thomas Jr. that was the main catalyst for the family to move cities at this time, rather than the loss of their business. Anyway, whilst further north, the couple welcomed 3 more children to their family, George, Violet and Corinne, before they felt it was finally time to return to their grand house in San Diego in 1868. When they did so, they actually started to lease out different parts of the home for different uses too. And over the years, the property played host to San Diego's first commercial theatre, a general store and even a county courthouse. However, there was another tragic event that was set to befall the Whaleys. In 1885, their second youngest daughter, Violet, took her own life shortly after getting married. Violet had discovered documents revealing that her new husband was a fraud, who had only married her in the hopes of getting his hands on some of the Whaley fortune. This is a terrible detail, but Violet actually shot herself in the chest with her father's gun in the backyard of the family home. It's said that Thomas found his daughter as she lay dying and brought her inside the property, where she then passed away. She left a note containing a passage from the poem Bridge of Sighs by Thomas Hood, in which she wrote, "Mad from life's history, glad to death's mystery, swift to be hurled anywhere, anywhere out of the world." Oh, poor Violet. It's just such a horrific situation. And this would, of course, make her the second Whaley child to have passed away in the home. Now, over the next few decades, the movements of the family in and out of the house were numerous. After Violet's death, the family moved to another property in San Diego, leaving the grand Whaley house empty for around 20 years. After different members of the family passed away, including Thomas in 1890 and his eldest daughter in 1905, Francis Whaley would eventually renovate the home once more so that his mother Anna and her surviving children could move back in 1912. And the home was then inhabited by the family until 1953, when Corinne Whaley passed away. In 1956, the Whaley House became a museum dedicated to preserving the stories of the property's historical and cultural importance in San Diego. It had, at one point or another, been a real community hub. The city's governmental offices and records had even been housed there at one stage. It really had played a significant role in the area's development. But despite being known for all of these important aspects of its heritage, this was not destined to be the Whaley House's ultimate claim to fame. So now that I've laid all of that groundwork for us in terms of the home's backstory, let's let's start talking about the strange happenings that led to the property actually trademarking itself as America's most haunted house. And to start things off, I wanted to revisit the aspect of this story I referenced towards the beginning, the fact that the land had once been an execution site. One of the most infamous prisoners to be sentenced to death by hanging at the gallows was James Robinson, better known by his nickname of Yankee Jim. In 1852, Jim and 2 other men were arrested after they stole a small boat from the San Diego harbor. Jim was charged with grand larceny, and to his complete shock, to the point that he audibly laughed and thought it was a joke, he was found guilty, which was fair enough, but he was sentenced to death. The very next morning, he was taken to the El Campo Santo gallows, all the while thinking that this was surely just a tactic to scare him off from any further criminal activity. But what happened next? Oh, it's truly grim. According to an article from grunge.com, quote, "Then they stood him up on a mule cart with the noose about his neck. He struggled to stay on his feet as the mules drove off, but fell. On account of his height, the fall didn't break his neck, and he slowly choked to death with his boots grazing the sand." It's also said that they misjudged his coffin size too, and had to break bones in his lifeless body in order to make him fit in the box. How horrifying is that? Now, some accounts out there state that Thomas Whaley himself was present for Yankee Jim's botched execution, but whether or not Whaley did encounter Jim just before his death, it's said that he certainly encountered him afterwards. Thomas was actually the very first in a long line of people to report hearing the sound of thumping footsteps in the completely empty upper floors of the house, and experiencing the feeling that the disgruntled spirit of Yankee Jim still remained on the land where his life was so brutally ended. Victor Santana, the operations manager at the Whaley House, told Today.com that Thomas also reported hearing the disembodied grunts of a man around the property, perhaps echoing the last noises he would have made during his terrible final moments on Earth. Jim is actually buried in the El Campo Santo cemetery right by the house, which adds an entirely new, chilling dimension to this story for me. It has all the ingredients of a classic haunting in my mind, a wronged soul still roaming the land where he was not only executed for something so petty, but also laid to rest or indeed unrest there, which I can only assume would not have been his chosen burial place. Thomas was far from the last person to report these haunted happenings believed to be related to Yankee Jim though. The parlor room in the house is thought to sit directly on the spot where Jim would have been hanged. It's often described by paranormal enthusiasts as one of the most active areas of the home, and people have reported feeling the presence of a very oppressive force whilst in this space. Back in 2017, 2 reporters from BuzzFeed, Shane and Ryan, decided to visit the Whaley House and film footage to document their findings. Whilst in the parlour, they mentioned that several spirits have been sighted in this room, and decided to each spend 5 minutes alone in the darkness to see if they picked up on anything spooky. While Shane decided to try and directly speak with the spirits, specifically Yankee Jim, he didn't feel anything in the room, but Ryan's turn yielded a different result entirely. While Shane said he felt quite relaxed, Ryan was visibly on edge, and while speaking to his camera during his own 5-minute stint, he suddenly let out a yell. He shouted to the team outside asking whether they were messing with him, and when they confirmed that they'd done nothing whatsoever, he revealed that something had whispered right into his ear, so clearly and so close by that he was convinced his co-host was pranking him. But there was no one else with him in the room, at least no one from the land of the living. You can actually make out a distinct whispering noise in the footage. It's quite unsettling, and the whole video is still available to watch on YouTube. So could this have been Yankee Jim, or another one of the spirits believed to reside in the home? This question leads us neatly on to our next set of tales, concerning the ghosts of the Whaley family members themselves. Now, given the tragedies that occurred in the home, namely the untimely deaths of both baby Thomas from scarlet fever and Violet by her own hand, it's perhaps unsurprising that there are numerous accounts which appear to involve the spirits of a very small child as well as a young woman. Both visitors to the home and members of staff have frequently reported hearing tiny footsteps, a toddler's cry, and even giggles coming from completely empty rooms in the house. And whilst many link these audible apparitions to Thomas Jr., it's also thought they could be attributed to the spirit of a different child who sadly perished in the home, a friend of one of the Whaley children named Annabelle Wasburn. In 2023, a travel writer named Tara Torres penned an article on Medium where she discussed her experience in the property. Her whole account was fascinating, but two things really stood out to me. Firstly was the fact that the house's guide asked a very particular question to her group at the start of their tour, inquiring as to whether there were any current or former law enforcement officers amongst them. Tara said that she raised her hand and was promptly informed by the tour guide, quote, "Watch yourself, Yankee Jim doesn't like cops." Tara then went on to describe her experience in the Whaley's dining room, as the guide was telling them the tragic tale of Annabelle's death, which occurred as the result of her running into a clothing line she hadn't seen and sadly breaking her neck. Tara said she felt something pressing against the palm of her hand. Though she was initially scared that she might be feeling the presence of Yankee Jim, she started to get the feeling that it was actually Annabelle who was holding her hand from beyond the grave. After all, it was the very room they were standing in that Annabelle actually passed away in, having been carried in from the garden by Thomas Whaley and laid down on the dining room table. And as it turns out, Tara's suspicions were confirmed. As the group were leaving the dining room, the tour guide casually mentioned that female visitors to the space sometimes reported the feeling of a child holding their hand. Shocked, Tara turned to the guide and said that that exact feeling had come over her moments earlier, and with a nod of acknowledgement, the guide confirmed their belief that that would have been Annabelle. I have chills. Can you even imagine having a paranormal encounter like that, and then having someone validate it for you completely unprompted just minutes later? Tara's article is great. I would definitely recommend looking it up if you have an account on Medium. Now, I know we went off on a bit of a tangent about Annabelle there, but don't think I've forgotten about Violet, because we actually have another tie-in with the law enforcement angle when it comes to one of the most compelling stories believed to involve her spirit, which took place within the grounds of the Whaley House. In 2011, the LA Times reported the tale of an unnamed police officer's personal paranormal encounter at the property, which had taken place almost 3 decades earlier. On the night in question, a 911 call had been made, alerting the police in San Diego that a woman had been seen in a state of distress outside of the Whaley house. The officer responded to the call alone, and when he arrived at the home, there was no one to be seen outside the front, so he ventured round to the back of the house to see if the woman was still present. That's where he laid eyes on a young woman who he described as being dressed in period clothing, clearly in floods of tears. As he approached her, he spoke words to the effect of, "Ma'am, are you all right?" Though it was dark, when the woman turned to face him, the officer could see that she was now smiling, and in an attempt to see her more clearly, he raised his torch and shone it towards her face. But the second the light hit her, the woman vanished before the officer's eyes. Though it's impossible to say for sure, it's widely believed that this spirit could have been Violet, which would make sense as it was at the back of the house that she went through with the act that would sadly end her life. But there's more. Remember Victor Santana, the Whaley House employee I mentioned earlier? Well, he's spoken about one of the earliest ghostly encounters he had at his place of work, and more specifically about how it was corroborated by yet another police officer. He told the LA Times, quote, "As I was setting the alarm code, I heard a woman's voice say, 'Why are you here?'" he recalled. "That really scared me to the point that I ran out the front door without completing the code." Victor said that the alarm going off alerted the police, who then attended the house to check that everything was okay. Here's what the article explains happened next. He claimed there was a woman in a green dress in the parlour, Santana said. This lady works here, doesn't she? He remembered the officer asking him. By the time backup arrived, the woman in green had disappeared. Countless members of the public and paranormal enthusiasts have had similar encounters too. When discussing this, Maritza Scandunas from the San Diego Ghost Hunters was quoted as saying, "They see things, they get touched, they hear things in real time. It's a really active house." And also added that herself and members of her group have been able to identify spirits they've seen at the house by name. And it's said that amongst them have been Anna and Thomas Whaley themselves. Whilst I suspect that the woman in the green dress could have been Anna, it's thought that Thomas reveals his presence in a slightly different way, with the smell of tobacco. Thomas was known for regularly smoking pipes and cigars in life, and one of the most common occurrences at the house to this day is that young female visitors will report feeling as though someone has just blown a puff of sweet tobacco smoke into their faces. In addition though, according to Victor Santana, the apparition of Thomas's spirit has also been described by some visitors, and it's always in the same spot, at the top of the staircase, looking down onto those touring around the house he built. I don't know about you, but the thought of a spirit looking down at me from a higher spot is especially creepy, because it's almost as though they're surveilling you. It feels more sinister somehow, even if it appears that most of the Whaley House ghosts are thought to be relatively benevolent. Going back to the topic of sense though, reports of this kind of activity are thought to extend to Thomas's wife Anna too. When she was alive, she would always wear a lavender-scented perfume, and it's this very aroma that staff working at the house say frequently lingers in the air, even when there's no possible explanation for why it might be there at that particular moment. But if you thought that the Whaley House hauntings were limited to just the human members of the family, think again. The Whaleys were known to be pet lovers, and according to Santana, quote, "You might feel something brushing up against your leg, even licking your leg in some cases, and they believe that's the family dog." I actually found this quite sweet really. I mean, if you're going to have a building full of the spirits of a family, it only feels right that their pets would have remained with them in the afterlife. I personally think if I had to choose a spirit to encounter there, a dog would be a great choice. Much better than the disembodied crying voice that Santana has spoken about hearing whilst alone in the house late at night, or the doll he says he saw move entirely on its own on one occasion. Oof. So, in terms of theories about the Whaley House hauntings, they naturally fall into one of two camps, those who believe and those who are decidedly more skeptical. From the way I've spoken about the stories throughout this episode, you'd be forgiven for thinking that I am 100% sold on the haunted status of the home. But as much as I do believe in the paranormal, there are a couple of factors which give me pause here. First of all is that I feel it's tricky to say that you believe a place is haunted for sure without having visited it yourself. I know that before I went to Alcatraz, for example, I wasn't certain that there were spirits still residing there, but afterwards there was no doubt in my mind that the place is still incredibly active spirit-wise. However, the other things that do leave me feeling a little skeptical in this case are, number one, the fact that the home is now very much an organised tourist attraction, and naturally they'll want to shout about their ghostly reputation in order to sell admission tickets, especially to their ghost tours. And secondly, the fact that some of the historical stories are difficult to verify. For example, the tale of the Whaley children's friend, Annabelle Wasburn. I couldn't find any information about her life or her death during my research, which of course could be due to the passage of time or records not being digitized, but you'd think that there'd be something out there to confirm that she really did exist. I think personally I do land more towards believer overall in this story, with a healthy dose of skepticism built in, but from what I've read and seen, those who are totally sold on the haunted status of the Whaley House tend to believe one of two things, or possibly both at the same time, that the spirits of the family linger in the home due to the traumatic losses they suffered there, and that perhaps the family themselves were cursed. I can understand understand both of these theories. After all, there were some terrible events that took place in and around the property. And as far as the curse theory goes, could it be possible that the culprit for this was none other than Yankee Jim? It's definitely one to think about, especially if it turned out to be true that Thomas Whaley really was at his execution. However, the final aspect of this story I wanted to end on today was something I promised to revisit from earlier, and that is the El Campo Santo Cemetery, which is just near the house. Whilst official records state that 477 people are buried within the cemetery, this is only partly true, as a number of the graves are technically positioned on what is now quite literally the street outside. An article by Hidden San Diego explains that, quote, during the falling of the Old Town period, the cemetery was abandoned and its brick chapel destroyed by fire. Just 2 years after the last body was buried here, a streetcar line was literally built through the graveyard, hence the reason for removing some of the tombstones. After repeated petitions to acknowledge the bodies that were buried beneath the street and sidewalk, white crosses were painted in their place. And all this leads me to wonder whether those interested in the Whaley House hauntings have been looking at this all wrong. Could the more disgruntled spirits which linger outside the home in particular be restless or displaced souls from the cemetery? After all, many of them were buried there long before most of the Whaley family members passed away. So could they even feel resentful that their peaceful resting place became such a hive of activity for the living once the home was built? This is the angle I just keep pondering, and I've decided there's only one thing for it. The next time I find myself in San Diego, I know exactly where I'll be heading to see if I think the Whaley property really lives up to its title of America's most haunted house. Oh, it had been far too long since I'd brought you a proper paranormal themed episode, and I really hope you found this story as interesting as I did. Although it was incredibly sad in parts, I think that the fascinating history of the place, tied in with the countless side stories and tangents, make this one really compelling. And of course, I cannot wait to hear what you think about this story. Are you feeling more skeptical than convinced about this one? Do you have any theories of your own about the Whaley House hauntings? Hearing your thoughts is always one of my favourite parts about doing the podcast, so please do get in touch. I'll be giving you a refresher on all the ways you can do so very soon, but not before we pay a visit to our outro feature, Weird Media, and this is going to be a fun one. Now, as you'll know if you're a regular around these parts, I don't tend to theme my weird media recommendations by time of year or anything like that, as I know people will end up stumbling across these episodes in all different seasons and at different times. But I hope you don't mind that today I'm getting a little festive with my shout out, and for the first time in a while, it's a music related one. So you might recall, as I've mentioned it before, that I'm a huge fan of the band The Pretty Reckless. But what you might not know is that Taylor Momsen, the band's singer, starred alongside Jim Carrey in the year 2000 in How the Grinch Stole Christmas, where she played Cindy Lou Who. Now, after Taylor formed The Pretty Reckless, it always kind of felt to me that she was keen to put some distance between her acting career and her music career, and considering that she was known for her role in Gossip Girl at the time too, I can totally understand this. But this year, something totally unexpected and absolutely wonderful has happened, and the crossover of my dreams has finally taken place. The band recently released a 7-song festive album called Taylor Momsen's Pretty Reckless Christmas, and part of it is built around her iconic role in The Grinch. On a couple of the songs, Taylor actually duets with her younger self, which is the cutest and most wholesome thing I have ever heard. And if you're thinking, wait, does that really work? Isn't it weird? I urge you to give it a listen, and I think you'll see why I love it so much. It's 100% the good kind of weird, in that it's kind of a bizarre mix that just completely gels together, and the result is this festive masterpiece. There are also some original Christmas songs on the album too, all of which have been stuck in my head for a good few weeks now. They're absolutely brilliant. There's some fantastic humour in there at times, and the songs are just complete bangers in my opinion. Of course, because it's the Pretty Reckless, most of the songs have a rock or blues base to them, and I can confidently say that it's my new favourite Christmas music of all time. So if you're looking to get in the festive spirit with some new music, I highly recommend checking out Taylor Momsen's Pretty Reckless Christmas. Okay, time for a quick rundown of all of our sources for this episode. There was that LA Times article I noted a few times. That was by Jay Jones from October 2011. We had 2 pieces from Today.com, one by Sarah Lemire from October of this year, 2025, and the other by Sophie Caldwell from October 2024. The Whaley House Museum official website was fantastic, especially for all those historical details about the house. There was that BuzzFeed mini documentary called The Spirits of the Whaley House, which you can find on the BuzzFeed Unsolved Network YouTube channel. We had the Medium article by Tara Torres from October 2023, the HiddenSanDiego.com article about the El Campo Santo Cemetery, a piece on the brilliant Atlas Obscura by a writer known only as Alex from 2011, a grunge article by Carlo Massimo from September 2022, a piece about the house on the website Fright Find, and finally, an article on the Ghost City Tours website about the spooky tours the house now hosts. As promised, here's that little reminder of all of the ways you can get in touch. On Instagram and Threads, just look up at Things Get Weird Podcast. On TikTok, we are at Things Are About to Get Weird. And on Facebook, you can find us by searching for the podcast name. That's where you'll find our main page and our private discussion group too. Our email address is thingsgetweirdpodcast@gmail.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, leaving a super quick rating or review wherever you're listening is hugely appreciated. On Spotify, you can do a star rating in just a quick tap, and on places like Apple Podcasts, you can leave a written review too. If you are listening on Spotify, feel free to leave a comment with your own thoughts on this episode's dedicated page. A huge and heartfelt thank you to all of you for joining me today and for continuing to be so wonderfully supportive. I'll be back again soon with another strange but true story for you. Be sure to watch this space. So, until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep it weird, but the good kind of weird.